This is an emergency. This is breaking news. I can't believe the SRA has authorised this.
One of the things that sort of got lost in all of the very kind press interest over the last week is that
UK SMEs are owed up to 20 billion in late payments.
I'm conscious that some people look at this and go, oh my goodness, am I going to lose my job?
It's definitely disrupted the industry, to say the least.
Suddenly I find I'm on the front page of the FT, which I never in a million years thought I'd ever be on. I got summoned on the Today programme. Maybe what's happened here is this is all just some sort of really weird dream and I ate too much cheese last night.
Do you think it might open the floodgates to more claims and then potentially overwhelm the court?
So that's very much a sort of the government and politician level of thinking. He's not allowed to propose case law because that is clearly a very, very high risk area.
If I counter that, do you think there might potentially be a skills gap in that sense for those types of tasks?
In those sorts of areas, I foresee that an AI-only product may not be as effective as a product that has a human that you can talk to.
I had to literally come up with it from my own brain.
It's probably controversial, but
A landmark moment for the legal industry. The Solicitors Regulatory Authority has officially authorised Garfield.Law, the first ever AI-generated law firm to be regulated and provide legal services in England and Wales. This isn't just another law firm using AI to streamline admin. Garfield.Law is entirely AI-driven, offering small businesses an AI litigation assistant to recover unpaid debts, guiding them through the small claims process all the way to trial. After hearing the news, I went straight to the source. In this conversation, I'm interviewing the founder of Garfield.Law, Philip Young, and I asked the questions that everyone wants the answers to. How do they avoid AI hallucinations? What safeguards are in place for clients? Will this replace lawyers? Who's really responsible if AI gets it wrong? What happened behind the scenes during the regulator authorization process? You're going to want to hear this one. So, Philip, your new AI-driven law firm has basically created a lot of, I'm going to use the word uproar in a good way. And I would say there's a lot of also comments and criticisms. Obviously, when new things are invented or creative, you're going to have people who have doubts or questions and things like this. So I know recently the SRA authorized, regulated your firm, Garfield.Law. You know, it was funny because my client sent me the link to the article from the SRA talking about, you know, the first AI-driven law firm's been authorized. And I clicked on it and I read it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Then I put my phone away. And 10 minutes later, it was like something hit me. I was like, hang on a minute. What?
yeah.
And then it just like, and then I got like, oh my gosh, like panic, not panic, but I don't know how to explain it. Like, I can't believe this is happening type of thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to write about this. So that was when I wrote a post about it, put it on LinkedIn. I contacted you. I was like, this is an emergency. This is breaking news.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, imagine what I felt like last week, because I like to just get on with my day job quietly and you know, be a sort of nerd / lawyer in the corner doing things to build this product. Suddenly I find I'm on the front page of the FT, which I never in a million years thought I'd ever be on in the FT on anything. And the front page of the Gazette, and I got summoned on the Today programme. I had to do national radio. I've never been on radio in my life. I had my parents listening to me. They woke up early to listen to me for like 3 minutes. I can't believe it. I've been spending the last week wondering if maybe what's happened here is this is all just some sort of really weird dream and I ate too much cheese last night or something, you know. Before I went to bed. You know?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't think it would be this massive. I really didn't. I thought this is a really, really interesting product. It's going to really help people, and it's got some novelty factors about it that make it a new thing. What I wasn't expecting was that lots of people to be really interested in it, because I'm just not an interesting person, frankly. Dan's a very interesting person. He's a very clever guy, you know, quantum physicist, all that. I'm really not, you know.
Oh, I'm sure you are. No, but I think my thought was, So on this podcast, I speak to so many managing partners, people in law, like so many people, literally more than 100 episodes. And we talk about the future of law. Oh, what could it possibly be like? So when I saw this article, after the 10 minutes when it sunk in and went into like my subconscious and conscious and everything, and I was like, hang on a minute. The future is literally here. I've been talking about it potentially coming in the next 5 to 10 years. It's literally here now. And I think that was what made me think, whoa, that's crazy. So if I felt like that, then I can only imagine how you felt seeing your face on the front of,
It's not what you want to see in the morning over your bran flakes. You talk about scaring small children and animals. Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes? How does it work? Can you tell me something that I can't find on your website, basically?
About how the product itself works, you mean?
Yes.
So I think one of the things that sort of got lost in all of the very kind press interest over the last week is that it's AI, but it's AI plus. There's also an expert system as well. So it's a sort of combination of two things. It's the AI plus the expert system. Inevitably with the press, I mean, the press have to write the stories in the way they want to write them, and they have to make them accessible for the people that is their readership. And so they've all focused very strongly on AI, but actually it's a lot more than that. And the way I like to describe it, it's a sort of synthesis of my 25 odd years of experience in practice, bringing all sorts of debt claims. And although most of my practice was sort of London city work, and so the size of the claims was very material, nevertheless, from time to time, I obviously did small claims work. I did when I started, when I was a trainee and when I was a junior associate. And also over the years, you find when you're a lawyer in someone's family that whenever there's a sort of family legal problem, it must be like being a doctor. People just get hold of you and say, Philip, can you help with this? And debt claims are a very common thing. And so I gave, as sort of the inspiration of this, my brother-in-law, Andy, who's a lovely bloke. He's a plumber up near Sheffield. And he, on occasion, had the problem that all small tradespeople have, which is that they do good work, and sometimes they get the odd person who just won't pay them. Not because they're insolvent, not because there's any problem with the quality of the work, just because they know that they can try and drive a discount that way, or maybe get away with not paying at all. And so whenever that would happen, as a good brother-in-law, I would try and help Andy out. Unfortunately, it wasn't that common, but it still happened from time to time. And I've always been conscious that this has been a problem. And so it made sense that this was something to solve. And I also could see that AI, and with the right sort of system built around it, would be a good sort of solution to this. That's the whole, from the website, you wouldn't get the fact that this is more than just an AI product. There's also this expert system built in as well, but that's the sort of the nub of the thing.
Whoa. I mean, where were you when I needed a plumber in Sheffield?
Well, I can't, because my dad also was a plumber, I know a bit about plumbing, but I wouldn't dare dream of plumbing someone's house because you'd end up with a swimming pool in your living room. So
can we delve a little bit deeper into the function of the firm? Are there lawyers? What goes on behind the scenes? Tell me a bit more about that.
So, I mean, the core team of us there's 5 of us, and then there's a sort of wider team of people who are altogether 15, including the core team. And the core team is basically the 2 founders, which is myself and Dan, plus 3 other guys. And of the founders, I'm obviously the lawyer, and Dan is the technologist, and the 3 other guys are software developers by profession. And then the wider team includes other lawyers, solicitors mostly. We've got a barrister in the team. We've got various other sort of skills and specialisms that have come in as well. Although I'm the lawyer, I'm basically a giant nerd. Like everyone in my generation, I grew up in the 1980s when the 8-bit computer revolution was happening, and you had all the BBC micros in the schools, and everyone either had their ZX Spectrum with a little wobbly keyboard, or they had their BBC microcomputer. And so I learned to program in those days, and I sort of maintained my interest throughout my career. And that's also part of the reason that we have got the team and the product we've got, because I think otherwise lawyers talking to software developers, it would be a bit like 2 people speaking 2 different languages. You need to interpret between them. But I can sort of, I'm not a professional programmer in the same way that Dan or the other guys are, but I understand what they're doing. I can read the code. I even have made contributions, and they've only laughed a little bit at me when they've seen some of the code I've written. Some of it they've said, actually, that's quite good, Philip. And some of it said, we'll just rewrite that slightly. But it's therefore made it a very sort of effective team. As we develop, we may take on sort of additional lawyers, some additional developers, but as required, basically. That's the plan there. So if anyone's watching this and thinking of sending in a CV, to save your time for the moment. We don't need anyone just yet. But that's the basic shape of the team. And I should say, I mean, the press has sort of described Dan as a quantum physicist, and I think he's quite flattered. He's got a master's in quantum physics, and he was actually about to do a PhD in photonics, and then he sort of chucked that in to go all in on Garfield, which is very good of him. So I think he would say he's got a background in quantum physics. We've noticed that some of the comments people have left on things like the FT article have said this guy's not a real quantum physicist because he doesn't have a PhD, and I think Dan would say, well, I never said I was. It's the press that said I was.
Right. Although I feel like he is being a bit modest there, and obviously people are having their input about what the definition of a quantum physicist is. But
yeah,
I feel like if you've got a master's degree in it, sounds like you're a bit of an expert,
Yeah, he's a really clever guy. He's far cleverer than I am, and we spent 2 years now having not just conversations about Garfield, but sort of all sorts of interesting conversations about physics and new discoveries that have been made over those 2 years, and obviously also the AI technologies that's been developing. And I think I've learned a lot from my co-founder in the process, and I fear he might have learned a bit of law in the process too, because he says from time to time he knows more about the CPR than he ever wished really to know. Certainly more about substantive law than he wished.
That poor guy.
Yeah, I know.
What do you subject him to?
That's what he thinks sometimes too. Yes.
It's funny because I was speaking to somebody about the future of law just a year ago, and she said to me, a prediction will be that scientists will be working with lawyers in order to create revolutionary things exactly like this. And I thought, yeah, she's probably right, actually, but I didn't think that it would happen this quickly. And I think it's incredible what you have built, actually. It's definitely disrupted the industry, to say the least.
I'm very flattered by all the interest, and I agree with you. I mean, if you'd said to me 3 years ago, hey, Philip, we're going to have a situation where AI is at a point where you can use it in practical contexts. Also, just having apps on your phone that you can ask for help with things with, and I think a lot of people do that now. They just go to ChatGPT, consumer grade LLMs, and ask sort of questions. I would have said that's science fiction, and you're at least 10, 15, 20 years away. And then if they go one further and said, oh, by the way, Philip, you'll be involved in building a useful practical application in the law, I'd have laughed at them and said, you've got to be joking. Somehow by a series of sort of decisions along the way, this is where we are now,
Yeah. I mean, when I first heard the news, my first thought was, I can't believe the SRA has authorized this, because they're notoriously restrictive. I'll say no more. How was the process of getting authorized and regulated?
Yes, I mean, obviously the SRA is a regulator, so they're right to be cautious and to take their time. And I think they've taken the right approach throughout this. So as I think has been mentioned in the media, it's been a long process and a thorough process. So it took 8 months altogether from start to finish. They did a very good job. They asked basically all the questions of us that if I'd been in their shoes, I would have wanted to ask, and a few more on top as well. The first question they had to ask themselves was a fundamental sort of an in limine question, a threshold jurisdiction question, which is, do they even have the power to regulate this? Is this a thing that falls within the regulatory framework? And they had to consider that very carefully, because obviously if it's something that fell outside their jurisdiction, then it was irrelevant to them, full stop. So that was, I mean, for all the lawyers watching, that was really a question about whether what Garfield does is a reserved legal activity, and thus is something that has to be subjected to either the SRA or the BSB's regulation in order to be conducted lawfully. I think the challenge is the law, the state of the law. If you look at the law in that field, it's a mess, frankly. There's no very clear definition of what is conducting litigation. There are cases, and there was a very helpful case a year or two ago, where particular activities, a court has said that is clearly conducting litigation, but that is not a sort of a thematic or principled approach. It's not sort of said anything that falls into this general definition is litigation. It said these particular activities are conducting litigation. And so the SRA wasn't given the easiest of tasks by Parliament with the development of case law. But I was always myself absolutely sure that what we were doing was conducting litigation, and therefore it was only right and proper that we sought regulation. So I approached the SRA, and also by reference to case law, I was able to show that the various of the things Garfield does fall within the particular activities that case law has said is conducting litigation. And of course, I said once you've done one of them, far less many, of course, then you are across the threshold and you should be regulated. Mm-hmm. I think going forward, one of the challenges the SRA is going to have, and I really think this is a challenge that Parliament should try and help them with, because there's been talk for years about the Solicitors Act and the Legal Services Act being improved, because the legislation is getting a bit old now, is to give them better definitions to work from, so that and that will help not just the SRA, it also help the ecosystem that I'm sure is bound to grow up of companies then knowing, is this something that's going to need to be regulated? Therefore, I have to go to the SRA. Is it something that doesn't need to be regulated? And also they can build accordingly as they build products. But once we were through that sort of definition, then the SRA wanted, without talking about anything that's confidential, they wanted to, have a very good look at who was behind it, what our skill sets were, the sort of product we were proposing. They've got an important regulatory mandate to try to increase access to justice. So they wanted to understand how this would increase access to justice. They wanted to look at issues of quality. They were very conscious, quite rightly, of all of the sort of the ethical topics that any lawyer should have well in mind, like how to deal with conflicts, how to deal with client confidentiality, how to ensure that your opponent knows what you are, which is, I think, a sort of new topic, because law firms have been law firms for thousands of years, but now suddenly there's this new sort of concept, and it's important that someone receiving letters understands that they're dealing with something a bit different, and understands the parameters of what might happen. And I think they're also concerned to sort of understand what the views of stakeholders were. And there we were very fortunate because, of course, government and the judiciary are very, very forward-thinking, and they want to see things appear that will help the ordinary people access justice. And so we've got a very positive sort of approach to that in this country. And so I think that was also part of the sort of the consideration of what they should consider and what they shouldn't. But yes, I liked all the questions because they were all aimed at the right topics. They're aimed at responsibility, accountability, those sort of important topics that I think are going to be fundamental with AI going forward. And of course, being the SRA, they wanted to know whose head was on the block if it all went wrong, and that's mine.
Yeah.
Because I designed the product with Dan, and I built it. It's only fair that it should be my head on the block if it goes rogue and tries to take over the world or something. Though I think the chance of that are small.
Wow, it's really interesting to hear actually what went on kind of behind the scenes in that authorization process. I think you're right. The government is quite forward thinking, and they're wanting to promote and push AI and the innovation as well. And so I think it's amazing that you've brought this to the legal industry, which is a notoriously backdated, old way of thinking profession.
Well, I mean, when I think about my journey through the law, and I think when I was a trainee, one of my supervisors, who was a very nice man, this would be in the late 90s. So we had computers, email, all of that. It wasn't those weren't new things. His secretary used to print out and bring him all his emails, and he had a computer on his desk. And I remember one occasion where he wasn't really experienced with using a mouse, and he was trying to get the cursor across the screen, and he'd run out of sort of mouse mat space and had the mouse halfway up the wall, desperately trying to get the cursor across. And I remember trying because if you're the trainee in the same room as the supervisor, you don't want to laugh at your supervisor. That would be a very bad idea. So I was trying desperately to sort of keep a straight face. And I think that's sort of the image of the profession. I think we've changed a lot in the 25 years I've been enrolled, but still, I mean, there's still definitely a sense that we lawyers think it's wizardry if we can remove a page from a PDF. And actually, the world is moving on very rapidly. We're looking at a very different sort of world that we're coming up to.
Yeah, definitely agree.
And I must say as well, I mean, part of this is that the firm that I co-founded and was partner at for 13 years, CYK, which is one of the top litigation arbitration boutiques in London. They're very forward thinking too, and they've got a lot of very good technology. And I think it sort of flows, when I retired from there, I was then thinking technology and law rather than just law. And I think that's probably the mindset we all need to be in going forward.
Yes, I completely agree with you. You mentioned one of the core reasons for coming up with this innovation is to enhance or increase access to justice for people who have small businesses and who get confused or overwhelmed about making small claims. Do you think it might open the floodgates to more claims and then potentially overwhelm the courts? Like, I'm talking later down the line in the process.
It's an interesting question and a concern that I've had. So I went to see the senior judiciary autumn last year, and I sort of said to them, is this your concern? Because if it's your concern and you don't want this to happen, then I'll go and find something better to do with my life. Goodness knows what, but the reaction was a really interesting reaction. They said no. They said no, and for three reasons. The first reason they said is that debt claims, at least statistically, every quarter you can have a look at the MOJ's website and they publish all the statistics. They said that 70% of debt claims never even get disputed. They just get issued and either get paid or they get settled or they just go to default judgment. And they said there's almost no burden on the system because the system they've got scales. So they said ultimately it's only about between 2 and 5% of small debt claims statistically get to a trial. So they said it's very much the minority. Secondly, they said what the biggest problem the court service has, at least in the county courts, is the sheer volume of people that turn up who are just unrepresented. And you hear all these jokes where judges say, oh God, the worst thing being a judge is when the person walks in the room and they've got a plastic carrier bag full of loose leaf papers. Because then as a judge, you've got a really difficult task ahead of you. You've got to try and get out of the person what their case is or their defence is. You've got to try and do it in a measured amount of time and then try and deliver justice. And what I was told was that anything that can help that is a really reasonably priced way of enabling those sort of people to get access to justice is a massive, massive plus to the court system, because it will reduce judicial time in dealing with that sort of thing. It will mean uniformity of claims, quality of claims. So if there's a sort of good average of quality of claims going through the system, judges can deal with them so much more quickly and just dispose of them. And so they said that will be a big plus for them. And thirdly, they said the other problem the court system has got is funding. And everyone knows that the court service is not funded as much as we'd really like. And there's particular problems with crime and family. And they said one of the big areas of incoming funding for the court service is the mass debt issuance that happens out of Northampton. And they said anything that increases our revenue, gives us more money. We can then use that money to help support the areas that are presently underfunded. So they said this is basically a win-win from their perspective. Helps people, probably over time reduces sort of judicial overload. Also helps to create further funding for the court service. I think they think this sort of thing is inevitable, and it's just a question of when, not if. And then, if so, you've just got to be ready to adapt as it throws up challenges. So that was a perspective that came back very much from policymakers, and also from government. So when I've spoken to politicians about this, that's what they say too. They say we're not concerned about the floodgates opening. Mm. We're more concerned about the benefits we're going to get.
Right. I also think when probably from their perspective, if they balance the floodgates opening against helping small businesses, because I know on your website it mentions, let me just get this, UK SMEs are owed up to 20 billion in late payments. So when the government weighs up these two things, helping businesses get back debts and late payments and these things, it outweighs opening the floodgates, because they can deal with the floodgates opening. They just put more processes, systems, people in place to deal with that. But in actual fact, it's more important for businesses to not be in debt, right?
Yeah, I think that's very much the thinking, certainly of the politicians. That's very much a sort of the government and politician level of thinking. I mean, they see these really huge sums of money that are not collected every year, and what they're thinking is that for a small business person, if they don't collect a £3,000 invoice, it's a very different problem than if a big city firm doesn't collect a £3,000 invoice, because for the small business person, that could be their summer holiday that they've just lost. So for their lives, it's really important. And also they're looking at it from a macro level. So if much larger sums of money are collected, businesses are going to do better. They're going to have better profitability. They're going to be able to take on more people. They're going to be able to expand. And we know that growth is a big, big theme with this present government. And also, the powers that be can see that that would mean more tax revenue would be collected, and more tax revenue supports more public services. So I think that from their perspective, this is also a sort of a win-win sort of situation. They like the idea of debts being paid rather than having to be written off.
Definitely. I had a lot of comments from that post, and I want to run a few past you to see what you think about them. I've chosen the most interesting ones.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So I thought it'd be interesting just to kind of see what people have said. There's a lot of questions. Someone asks about, so you mentioned that Garfield protects against hallucinating. How does it protect against hallucinations, and what are hallucinations in a very simple way that lawyers can understand?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So it's very tempting when you use a consumer grade LLM like ChatGPT or Gemini, stuff like that, that you think you're talking to a real person. And it's easy to fall into the trap. You're talking to sort of almost a godlike entity, that they just know vast quantities of information. But it's important to bear in mind at all times that what you're talking to in a very rough and ready sort of description is a sort of probabilistic machine that works out what the next word should be when it generates an output in response to a prompt. That's obviously a very broad summary of what it does, what an LLM does. But the consequence of that is that you can get a bit lost in thinking, wow, I've got this really complicated, clever thing that is going to be just give me the answer to everything. And the danger of that is that this sort of technology can hallucinate is the buzzword. And what that means is that it is presenting information to you that sounds plausible on its face, but actually when you dig under the surface is inaccurate. And that's because what it's doing is essentially probabilistic rather than deterministic. Now, in law, we've had over the last couple of years some pretty nasty horror stories. And there was a case last week actually in our courts where lawyers unfortunately have been sort of sucked into the impression that they're dealing with a sort of godlike intelligence, and they've accepted uncritically the answer that's come out, and then it's like the worst thing ever that a litigator could fear is they've then presented false information to the court, either false facts or particularly invented case law. And in fact, there was a case in America where the lawyer even asked for the judgments backing the case citations, and the LLM hallucinated the cases. So he presented entirely fictitious cases to the court. When those sort of first examples came out, I sort of was in a bit of a cold sweat about it, because I thought, this is really a high risk area. We can't have anything even close to any of this. Mm-hmm. You've got to have a reliable product. So that's the issue, and that's the challenge. In how you solve it, part of the answer is architecture, part of the answer is technological development, and part of the answer is user interaction. So in architectural terms, you can build products in such a way that you radically reduce the possibility of hallucinations. And what I won't do is I won't go into sort of the gory detail of how you do that, because one, I think your listeners' eyes might glaze over, and secondly, my co-founder Dan regards quite a lot of that stuff as proprietary, and he knows where I live, so I better not say anything too openly. So that's architectural. And technological development, obviously all of the big providers of LLMs, so OpenAI everyone's heard about, Anthropic people haven't heard about so much, but that's another very big provider. Google, Facebook's got the Llama series of models, so I should call them Meta, not Facebook. See, you're showing my age there. All of them are pouring huge sums of money into trying to reduce the incidence of hallucinations. If you look online, you'll see statistics showing that the incidence has dropped dramatically, even in 2 years, and will keep dropping. I think it will never get to zero, because the inherent nature of probabilistic technology is there's always this risk. It's just going to get very much smaller because of all the guardrails built around it. Thirdly, user interaction. So the approach we've taken with Garfield is not an autonomous system. It's not a sort of system where you give it an invoice, you press one button, and off it goes and goes through the whole process. It's sort of designed to mirror the way that a good law firm would operate. So in other words, the facts come from the clients, and the process and the knowledge of the substantive law and the procedural law comes from Garfield. It's all sort of in the expert system. So every time you give Garfield something, it tries to work out what the next step is, what it should generate if it's a document, and it also tells you what it's understood. So that the user can see at every stage what Garfield believes is the state of the facts. And I say that's like a good law firm should do. So like a good law firm, when they draft a letter for a client, they should send the draft to the client for approve before sending it. That's very much Garfield's approach. So the user also has a responsibility to make sure that if there has been a misunderstanding, just with the lawyer, the user corrects that. What the user is not expected to do, of course, is to be a lawyer, although we do have law firms using Garfield, but we're assuming that a lot of users aren't law firms, and so we don't expect them to know the law, procedure, all those sort of things. And there's also specific things we built in. So, for example, Garfield is not allowed to propose case law because that is clearly a very, very high-risk area. And I have no desire to be summoned in front of any sort of judge, district, circuit, high court, you name it, and have my practicing certificate sort of richly torn apart in front of me, like, no thanks.
Yeah, definitely. In a way, it's kind of good that we've had these cases happen before. And I think I remember last year a judge in New York got annoyed about someone who brought a fake case and stuff. So I think it's good that we've had these things happen so that know now, we're not going to touch case law because this is a dodgy area.
And we've also been testing it, of course, iterating over 2 years. And so the more you test, the better you can make something, the more robust you can make something. And actually, one of the eye-openers for me in building Garfield is that building the product was not the majority of the work. The majority of the work was building all the infrastructure around the product to test it. This is not something that's been shown to most people because it's not relevant to most people, but you can do an entire dummy claim through the whole of Garfield, including generating defences, things like that. So it's basically a sort of a synthetic version of the small claims court that sits on our system. But you need that in order to build the product and in order to test it properly and to feel confident in its performance.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I know. People keep saying, why don't you build a defence side product? And we're never going to do that. We're going to be claimant side only, I think, for debt claims.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah. I got a comment which says, a common problem in the small claims environment is harassment of debtors by human debt collectors and an inability for debtors to have access to a reasoned negotiation and discussion with a human decision maker in an organisation claiming they owed a debt. Will these problems be resolved in AI debt collection?
I certainly hope so. I think it's really important to be responsible about these sorts of things. What you don't want to do is you don't want to harass someone. There's a line between sort of politely but firmly seeking the payment that's due to you and crossing that line and then harassing someone. And we clearly want to be very much on the right side of the line. The way that we have approached Garfield is that the debtor should always be able to talk to the user directly. And indeed, also payments don't go through our hands. The payments go from the debtor directly to the creditor. And so if the debtor sort of gets a letter and thinks, oh, crikey, I've just overlooked that invoice, I should pay it, or I want to pay that, but I need time and indulgence, then they can always speak to the creditor about that. And if that's what's agreed, then the user tells Garfield, and Garfield will understand that there's a period of time now to wait and see if when that time's up, the money turns up, and then everyone's happy, or maybe it doesn't, in which case there might need to be further sort of steps taken.
I know you've spoken a lot about the user experience and how it's all set up, and it sounds great. I guess in practice, how does this translate to customer satisfaction? Because I know with a lot of AI generated things, there could potentially be an increase in consumer distress, especially if they're not able to, I guess, speak to a human lawyer straight away, or is there an option for that? How would you, resolve that type of issue?
The idea behind Garfield is that it sort of provides a sort of the hand-holding that if you wanted to pay a lawyer to do, they would do. And so, although we obviously also very much cater for law firms as well, because I've been really keen throughout this to sort of have a very level playing field and to help the profession. But so the idea behind it is that if you've got questions about the process or concerns, you can ask Garfield and it will answer them. Obviously, a lot more swiftly than you might get if you were sort of having to wait for somebody to have time available to answer a phone call and stuff. We haven't designed it that there is a sort of lawyer on call, because that is the antithesis of the whole idea.
Yeah.
The moment you have to have people, it's very time intensive, it becomes costly, suddenly you've got to charge for that, very understandably. That's the sort of the traditional model. Mm-hmm. I think some users will definitely want to have an overseen process by humans, and that's part of the reason why he was very keen to build for law firms as well, so that those particular people can say, well, I don't want to just use an AI product, I want to still use a law firm, but if they've got the benefit of a solution that enables them to be more efficient and enable them to sort of gain benefits from it, then I'd rather use them. And that's one of my sort of general themes. So this is stepping away from this question a bit, but one of my general themes is about sort of the future. And the Master of the Rolls has been giving a lot of speeches about how eventually we may have AI judges and AI advocates and all of that. And I think there's a limit. So although I've built with Dan Garfield, I would personally hate to be in a world where you had AI judges or AI advocates. What I see very much is that, in my experience, litigation was a very human process, and over a certain threshold where you move gradually away from what you might call the commoditized end of the market, then I think you need humans to be in the process with you. And I'm thinking as well, particularly of areas that are very emotive, like family, and I imagine immigration, which you were in, Holly, was very emotional, and definitely crime.
Yeah.
And so in those sorts of areas, I foresee that an AI-only product may not be as effective as a product that has a human that you can talk to. And one of the other sort of topics I've been talking about is this training of lawyers, because I would really like lawyers to start having psychology training as part of their law degree. I really wish I'd had some psychology training. So, I mean, I spent years dealing with some very interesting behaviors by human beings and thinking, oh, what on earth is going on here? And then thinking to myself, this is all sort of, I wish I'd done psychology as well as law. And I really think we need to bring that in. I think the legal training needs to change in future. An Irish silk was telling me a few months back that 100 or 50 years ago, around that sort of time, it was considered professional negligence for an Irish barrister not to know the entirety of Irish law in their field. And of course, that nowadays is utterly impossible. An entire room full of books, utterly impossible. But that shows what's changed. I mean, we're moving from a world where you've got to have the knowledge in your head to you've got to know where to find it, and you've got to have all the human skills to help the person through the process, I think. Because technology will otherwise support you as a lawyer to get to the solution your client wants.
Completely agree. Yeah. I mean, for me, it would have been quite useful if I had done a therapy module in law. Yeah. Because I had multiple clients come crying to me. And what do you do in those? You don't learn that in law school.
No. I had the same experience. So although I was doing big ticket commercial litigation arbitration, and my clients tended to be sort of business people of mature years, shall we say, I had people crying in my offices from time to time. And you could probably tell, and your listeners could probably tell, I'm quite British and I'm slightly awkward, and I sort of tap them awkwardly on the back and say, there. Well, I was thinking, maybe other countries would give them a hug or something, but I was like, how do I deal with this situation where the clients had, fallen apart in front of me? And to have a bit of therapy training would have been very helpful. Not quite the core of the job, but still very helpful.
It kind of is I would say it was, I would say 50% in immigration, 50% no immigration law, 50% no psychology, be a good therapist, know how to handle people, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence. It was pretty much that, really. I mean, this goes to one of the points that I have been saying over and over again to people who, well, particularly lawyers who are scared about AI taking over and are actually scared about this type of business model in actual fact, because they say, well, what about the people? You're going to be taking jobs away from people. And I say, well, in actual fact, this is an opportunity for lawyers to start to upskill themselves and develop in these other areas and become more human, so that they're the go-to people for human things, human related law that AI can't possibly do right now anyway. So I think that the opportunity is there, as opposed to it being a risk to jobs. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, I'm conscious that some people look at this and go, oh, my goodness, am I going to lose my job? And I think not. I've been thinking about this a lot for the last 2 years, and I think not. I think there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, human nature. So obviously, I was a litigator, not a transactional lawyer. And I think the only circumstance where the litigation ceases to be a big thing is, or any form of contentious work, is if humans suddenly become incredibly honest, reasonable, fair-minded, self-sacrificing individuals. And we've not seen much evidence of that in the 100, 200,000 years where humans have been about. And I don't see much evidence of that happening in the future. So I think that is a fundamental driver of the fact that people have disputes. And so that will continue. what I think AI will do is it will drive out of the law a lot of what I call the less attractive work, the sort of work that no one really likes doing. So the very time intensive administrative tasks. And I can think back to when I was a trainee and I did giant disclosure exercises, and that was in the days where it was all paper and pen rather than on relativity and stuff. And it was really painful. And you look forward to getting more experienced and moving away from that and moving more into the better quality stuff, the strategy, the client management, those, the thinking about the case, formulating case, those sorts of things. I think a lot of that sort of drudgery almost will go. So disclosure exercises, giant doc review, just administrative tasks that don't actually add much value, but they have to be done, and they make claims awfully more expensive. What that will mean is that lawyers will be able to focus on the higher value quality work, I think, which is what we all ultimately came into the profession to do. Because I don't know any lawyer who came in and said, what I really want to do is sit in a conference room and look at 10,000 documents for 2 weeks. I don't know, or do a giant due diligence exercise. I think the implication of that, though, is that if a lot more claims across the entire world of contentious work become, over time, a lot more economic to do, is that a lot more claims will be brought. And so there's one factor that pushes down and one factor that pushes up. And so I'm therefore sort of an optimist. I think what will happen is that there'll still be, the same, maybe even more work about, but what lawyers will be doing is focusing on better quality work, higher quality work, adding real value. And as we've been talking about, developing other sorts of skills that will also complement their day job. I'm actually really excited for that. I'm looking forward to seeing what other things people build, how they can make lives more pleasant. And there'll become a generation of paralegals and trainees who just aren't having to do the horrible stuff. They're getting straight in at the good stuff, and learning the ropes properly.
True. Although if I counter that, I think the jobs that are being done, well, can be done by AI, and probably in the future will be done by AI moving forwards. Well, I guess a lot of firms will catch up. Those were the jobs that gave me the core grounding and core skills, even sending complaint emails or letters that your AI is creating, me writing them from scratch, and at a time when I didn't use Google, I didn't have any type of device that would help me formulate it. I had to literally come up with it from my own brain.
Yeah.
That's what developed my skills and helped me become good at what I did, and actually helps me now, even though I'm out of law. So will there be kind of, do you think there might potentially be a skills gap in that sense for those types of tasks?
I think what happens is that the skills change. So instead of sort of learning how to sort of write certain types of correspondence, you wouldn't need to worry so much about that because the system will do a very good first draft, maybe as technology develops better than that even, for you. And so you don't have to sort of learn how to do it from scratch. And so you lose that skill, but you gain other skills instead. I'm always reminded when I think about this so when I was a youngster, one of my summer jobs was I sold ice cream in Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, because I'm a country boy lad from Derbyshire originally.
I love Chatsworth. It's such a
Chatsworth's lovely. Yeah. Go immediately. It's a wonderful place.
Yeah.
And the people I used to work for, that was the old Duke and Duchess, Deborah Mitford and Andrew Cavendish, and they were very nice too. They'd always stop and have a chat. But one of the things I noticed when I sold ice cream is that a certain generation would sort of say, why are you doing the maths with a calculator? You should be doing it all in your head. And I always thought to myself, why would I could do it in my head, but it would take time and it'd be hard work. And why would I do that when I've got a calculator here? So I need to get through the customers. And I think it's the same, in general terms, the same concept, which is if you have a tool that does that particular task for you, you can focus on higher level tasks, which of course in that case was trying to persuade people that what they really needed was an ice cream at that moment in time.
Yeah, I think maybe they were hoping that you would miscalculate it and they'd get it for a lower price.
Yeah, maybe. Exactly. Yeah. Which would be a terrible indictment of what I was obviously showing as being my likely level of maths.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have come up with this idea of people potentially losing jobs from AI, but I think it gives us an opportunity to open up different and new jobs. What about AI compliance experts? These jobs that are not yet necessarily, or they might be created, but they're not common. There are opportunities for different jobs to come into play, right?
Yeah. And I imagine jobs will be invented that we can't even imagine or foresee at the moment because we haven't built the tools to require them. And just in the same way as if you go back to, I don't know, the 1820s or 1810s before Stephenson had invented his rocket and all of that, your job might be you're going to open the locks on the canal. That's your transportation job. But what you hadn't appreciated is that in a few years' time, you might be stoking a steam engine or driving a steam engine or designing a railway or something. You just couldn't have imagined that would be a thing you'd be doing. So I think it's a very interesting time we live in. And I was reading something the other day over the weekend about apparently the new Pope was talking about AI and how he took his name partly because one of the popes was there for the first industrial revolution and he thinks he's here for the fourth. And I thought, goodness me, maybe he's right. Maybe this is going to be utterly transformational for our civilization.
Yeah, I do feel that, especially when I read the article about, the SRA article, that was what hit me, I think. Do you think that traditional firms, there'll be some sort of pressure on traditional firms to level up and come up with different innovative ideas to not necessarily create a structure like yours, but to use AI and upgrade their tech and make a better service for their clients based on this?
I definitely think firms will evolve, and they have done even in the 25 years I've been in practice. When I think about the firm I trained at, they had a telex operator, a lady who operated a telex, who was sort of sat almost in the loft because it was a shipping insurance firm, so they had to talk to lots of ships, and so they had a telex machine. It was a great bit of technology, made all these sort of funny noises, and in that 25 years, we've moved to the world we're in now, and I think firms will just continue to evolve because that's the nature of business. One of the reasons I've been so keen to build Garfield for law firms as well as for non-law firms is because I've been very conscious that the really big city firms have got enormous resources. They are throwing a lot of money at this. They're building a lot of proprietary tools internally and things like that. But that doesn't apply to smaller practices and particularly high street practices. And I started in Derbyshire, so a lot of the people I know are partners in high street practices, and they don't have a giant budget for new technology and stuff. So I wanted to sort of try and build something that they could use for themselves that would give them a advantage. And I hope that's sort of the way it goes. Some law firms will build their own products. Some law firms will build products for other law firms, and then the legal tech sector will also build products for law firms. And I imagine that we'll get to a point where there'll be plenty of offerings in every sort of space of legal practice. Mm-hmm. One thing I'd say on that, though, and this is my own philosophy, if you see what I mean, and it's probably controversial, but I think also this would definitely be controversial with anyone who is a tech guy as opposed to a law guy. I found when I was buying law tech, at CYK, that often you'd be shown products that look really good, but they didn't quite hit the spot. And the reason for that was that they were built and led by tech guys, not by lawyers. And I think it's really helpful, and I think particularly importantly with AI, and particularly if you're going to be regulated, that the product is built with a team led by a lawyer. Because certainly in the case of Dan and my collaboration and with our team, the fact that I've been sort of leading it all has meant that an awful lot of time's been spent. And I think I've built something that lawyers will find particularly useful because I've really built it for what I would need, if you see what I mean. Whereas I think sometimes to say tech-led products don't quite hit the spot. And so I would like to see these sort of products, I'd like to see them lawyer-led if possible. The problem now is that lots of tech guys are going to hear this and they're going to go, right, I'm going to go and find this guy and get him.
No, they'll just find forward-thinking lawyers, which is good. We need tech and lawyers to come together and start, talking.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. That's one of the challenges, trying to find, as we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, two different disciplines that are able to talk to each other and build useful things as a consequence.
Absolutely, yeah.
Another challenge is we're going to also need some more support from government. So, for example, HMLR, its API, don't get me started. Whereas Companies House API is brilliant. And obviously, not having an adequate API is just not going to cut it in this 21st century that we're in. And I think governments are aware of that. And in the same vein, there's an awful lot of enthusiasm, to put it mildly, for the court service to now have a proper API. And so you could get to the world where law firms could connect directly to the court systems programmatically. And that would open up a wealth of possibilities in terms of new products, better ways of working, things like that. Mm-hmm. And that is something where the judiciary, I know, are very keen on it. I think the MOJ is very keen on it. And the challenge is going to be, as always, persuading the people that hold the purse strings that this is a thing to invest in.
Right. It's been such an interesting conversation.
I really want to thank everyone for their interest. It's been really kind. And I wasn't expecting any of this, as I mentioned earlier on in the call. I was expecting to sort of, this product to be launched and to get a little bit of interest and some people to use it, and then over time to grow. We'll continue to try and evolve this product in a way that really helps people, lawyers and also non-lawyers.
It's created interesting conversation amongst the legal profession across the world, because they're starting to think, oh, well, what's going to happen in my country? And is there going to be a firm like this pop up in my country and these things? But also it's a very exciting development for small businesses as well. So it's really, really great and revolutionary.
Thank you. Well, let's see how it goes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of More Than a Lawyer.